I'm Kaylin Nelson.
My name is Aiden Dwyer.
Hi, I'm Harrison Mill.
And I'm Megan Gallagher, and today we're going to be presenting our country report on Peru. To kick things off, we wanted to start by talking about the land and location of Peru itself. You can see Peru here represented in green on the globe. Peru is located on the western border of South America and is bordered by Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, and Ecuador. Just to give you a little bit of a relative information on how big Peru really is, Peru is almost double the size of Texas. And when you have a piece of land that's double the size of Texas, you can imagine that it comes with multiple different geographical regions. There's three main geographical regions I want to touch on today: the Pacific Coastal Strip, the Andes Mountains, and the Amazonian lowlands. When you have all of these different regions, you can imagine that there's many different climates, especially in a place as big as Peru. So depending on where you are in Peru, you're going to experience different climates. If you're on the coastal strip, you're going to be experiencing more of a tropical climate. Whereas if you're in the desert, it's going to be more dry, in the mountains, more frigid. So really just depending on where you are is where the climate will differ. And the last thing I wanted to point out here is that the capital of Peru is Lima. Lima is the largest city in Peru based on population, and the population in Lima is 7.7 million people. With 7.7 million people living in Peru, that begs the question, how many people live in Peru in general? Well, the answer to that is 32 million people. With a population of 32 million people, when you start to break that down, you really start to learn about the people. You learn that almost 80% of the population is living in urban areas. You also can learn by looking at this graph, or this table, that the majority of the population is either Native American or Mestizo. And when you're looking at the population pyramid on my right, you'll also see that the average life expectancy in Peru is about 77 years, with it averaging a little higher for females and typically a little lower for males. And now Kaylin's going to talk about the Peruvian government.
Peru is a presidential republic government type. They gained their independence from Spain on July 28, 1821. They have a legislative, executive, and judicial branch governments. The leader of the Republic of Peru is President Martin Alberto Vizcarra Cornejo, who is elected for a 5-year term by absolute majority in 2018, and this is him. Peru is a member of dozens of global organizations. Some of the ones that we have talked about in class that they are members of are the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. We will now move on to the economy in Peru. The current GDP in Peru is 222 billion US dollars. It has been a constant incline since 1960, as you can see from this graph. The current GDP per capita is 6,941 US dollars, and the current unemployment rate is 6.9%. The current debt in Peru is $66.25 billion. The annual growth rate in Peru is 3.977%. As you can see from this graph, it's fluctuated drastically since the 1960s to 2018. This graph shows the differences between the imports and the exports and what industries they come from for Peru. 72% of the imports in Peru are in the manufacturing industry. A lot of these include plastics, machinery, vehicles, iron, and steel, and the main countries they get their imports from are China, Brazil, and the US. Exports, on the other hand, mainly include fueling and mining materials such as copper, zinc, petroleum, and natural gas, and they export to countries such as the United States, Switzerland, China, and South Korea. This is just an image of a large mining industry in Peru.
I'm going to be talking about Peruvian culture as well as how Peruvian culture relates to Hofstede's cultural dimensions. First, let's take a look at the languages spoken in Peru. The first official language of Peru and the most commonly spoken is Spanish. Other official languages include Quechua and Aymara, which are both regional languages spoken by indigenous people in the south of Peru along the Bolivian border. Next, we'll take a look at Peru's religious makeup. About 3/4 of the country practices Catholicism, making it the largest religion practice. The other major religion in the country is Protestant, with about 18% of the population practicing. Outside of those two religions, there's really no other significant major religious practice. Now we are going to take a look at Peruvian cuisine. Peruvian cuisine gets its roots from a mix of Spanish and Inca culinary traditions. Popular ingredients in Peruvian cuisine include maize, tomatoes, and potatoes. Examples of popular Peruvian dishes include ceviche, which is a fish dish with marinated citrus juice, and chupe de camarones, which is a shrimp soup. Now we are going to take a look at one of the cultural traditions in Peru, the marinera. The marinera is a courtship dance that involves the use of handkerchiefs as props. The marinera is said to have originated in the city of Trujillo and has many different variations, including the norteña, serrana, and limeña. Now we are going to look at Peru through Hofstede's cultural dimensions. HofstedeInsights.com ranks Peru on an index of each of the 6 cultural dimensions, and here's what they found. On the Power Distance Index, Peru received a score of 67, indicating strong, centralized power arrangements. Some people believe this is traced back to the tightly structured Incan Empire. On the Individualism versus Collectivism Index, Peru received a score of 16, indicating that Peru has a very collectivist society, similar to other Latin American countries. When it comes to masculinity versus femininity, Peru scored a 42, indicating a slightly more feminine society. Peru scored an 87 on the Uncertainty Avoidance Index, which means that their culture shows a strong need for rules and structure. On the Long-Term versus Short-Term Orientation Index, Peru scored a 25, meaning that they are more concerned with the present than future. Finally, on the Indulgence versus Restraint Index, Peru scored a 46, indicating that they are slightly more likely to indulge than restrain from things.
Currently in Peru, last year the Nazca lines were discovered in 2019. Some of these images date back to 100 BC, being over 2,000 years old, and partly due to Native American tribes that were in the area. They were discovered by a Japanese research team with a group of archaeologists and modern technology, as well as research. There's over 140 images that can be seen in the aerial footage, like as seen in the picture to the right. In conclusion, Peru's growth rate is nearly 4%, which is relatively high, and a GDP rising since the 60s. Most exports come from the mining industry, making that industry worth investing in. The population is primarily Native American, being roughly about 45% of the population. And there's also 3 vastly different geographical regions in Peru. Peru has a coastline as well as mountains and lowlands.